Hey guys, welcome to the K Nation Movement podcast. Happy for you to tune in. We haven't had a podcast in a few weeks, but we do have a couple lined up. So thanks for tuning in. We're on episode 21 today with Jason Redman. He's a decorated Navy SEAL, retired. He has a book called The Trident, and he focuses on leadership. It's a really valuable podcast. I had an absolute blast chatting with him. I learned a lot myself. Hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. As always, if you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe. And if you can write us a review and rate it 5 stars, it would be very helpful. So enjoy it and have a good one. Perfect. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited about this one because, our motto as a company is to stay focused and be consistent. And when I heard your podcast with Jocko Willink and heard you discussing the concepts of leadership and failure, resiliency, I mean, everything resonated with not just what we're about, but also what this podcast is about and why we try to bring guests on here, bring perspective from their personal experiences. And I find it's incredibly helpful and valuable to our listeners to apply those principles to their life. But you're an impressive guy. I mean, not just your accolades and what you've done as a Navy SEAL, but outside of the Navy SEALs as well. But going back to the very beginning, I mean, how did you initially get involved with the Navy SEALs? Was that something that was in the family and you decided to follow suit, or was that something that you just grew into as a young kid?
No, it was something that my family had been a military family. It wasn't necessarily that I grew up on a base or anything like that. My dad had been in the Army before I came along, but I grew up with his stories, and then both my grandparents had served in World War II, so I grew up with those stories, and it was just something I had just a hunger from a young age to want to be in the military. And my dad actually told me about the SEAL teams when I was probably about 14 years old. While he was serving in the Army, he had SEALs that came through airborne school with him, and I met them, was very impressed with who they were, and he kind of told me about them. Back then, we didn't have the internet, so you couldn't go Google SEALs and find out anything about them, but very mysterious, not a whole lot of information back then, and it really intrigued me. I was very much interested, and I told my dad, this is where I'm going to go. This is what I want to do, and he helped feed that, and I never looked back.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from the time where you decided like becoming a Navy SEAL was exactly what you wanted to do, what was the process like? I mean, did you have to go to school first and then decide to go through an application process? I mean, how did that work from the thought process to really getting your foot in the door?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I was not, you're probably likely candidate for anyone to think of who was going to become a SEAL. We lived in North Carolina. I lived kind of on a farm, so we lived outside. So, I mean, I was active in that capacity, but I wouldn't consider myself an athlete back then. Real small guy. I'm not a big guy now. I'm about 5'8" and 170. But back then, when I decided to do this, I literally was, the proverbial 95-pound weakling. And I just said, man, well, if I'm going to be a SEAL, I better start working out. I better start playing some sports. So that kind of started this journey. I actually went out for the football team. I wasn't a starter, but I enjoyed playing. I enjoyed being part of the team and definitely learned a lot. And really started to focus on my fitness, on, running and working out and calisthenics and weightlifting. I started wrestling. So all these things kind of played into starting to forge me. Probably by the time I got to my senior year, the end of my junior year, I actually joined the Navy. I'm part of a program called the Delayed Entry Program. So I joined in the fall of my senior year of high school. September 11th, 1992 is actually the day I joined. And in that last year, I really ramped up my level of working out. I mean, I was working out probably at least twice a day and just doing everything I could. I knew what the SEAL training physical was. And I was just just laser focused on building myself to where I could knock out that test.
Yeah, and I mean that's really what it takes to accomplish anything to that degree, right? That laser focus, and not getting distracted through that process. And while you were doing that, how did you build this the size and endurance to go into buds training. I know that, from every story I've ever heard about people who have gone through that, no matter how fit they perceive themselves to be, how mentally fit or physically fit, aerobic capacity, strength, that is a whole different ballgame. So how did you feel that you were able to build yourself to where you needed to be to get there? Or was there a feeling of always knowing that you might not never be necessarily fully prepared, that you just had to kind of take the plunge and see what happens?
I think that's it. It's the latter. And that's never an excuse to not be ready for something. But what it is so many people in life are looking for perfection. They'll train and train and train, and then they'll never execute because they think, well, if I get to this level, that's when I'll really be ready. And nothing in life works that way. I mean, so many people never go after their hopes and dreams because they keep trying to attain this level where they think, well, now I'll be ready. And it doesn't work in anything. It doesn't work in business. It doesn't work in just about anything. I guarantee every Olympic athlete out there wishes they had a little more time to train before they go do the event. But, at some point you have to get to that level and just say, okay, I am close. And from here forward, then it becomes up top. It becomes mental. And so much of SEAL training is mental. Physically, we put thousands of guys through training every year. And of course, our attrition rate is about 80%. So we graduate, maybe 100 some guys a year that actually make it through SEAL training. And out of the thousands that start SEAL training, every single one of them passes both the basic and the advanced fitness test we have for them. So on paper, there's absolutely no reason that they should not graduate from training because they've met the minimum requirements. So physically, we know they're ready because we give them this test. We know that if you can meet these standards, you have the ability to physically make it through training. So at that point, then it becomes mental. And, it is just the ability to endure discomfort. It is the ability to endure pain and suffering is really what it comes down to. And endure the unknown. Lots of what you do in training, you don't know when that pain and suffering is going to end. And sometimes life is like that. I mean, so many people check out or quit because it is hard, but also because of the grind, and they don't know how long they can endure that grind. And the reality is the human body can endure so long, so much longer than you ever think you really can. It's just continuing to commit and put one foot in front of the other. And that's really how guys make it through training.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, the mindset that you have to work for a finite amount of time in terms of sacrifice and grind, it's what limits people a lot because, in life there is no end to the grind, right? It's never going to stop. One challenge will end. And if you got through that, you'll likely face another challenge much soon after that. So, I think you're absolutely right with that. The mental side of it is everything. And you talk a lot about leadership, which I think is really, really important because I think it's a concept that's misconstrued. People assume that you can't be a leader unless you're the head of a company or you're the top ranking general in the army or whatever it might be. I mean, there are levels of leadership and there are ways that people can apply themselves to be leaders even in their own micro environment. So can you go into the concept of say social leadership and how that can even affect something as small as your circle of friends or family?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll even talk about, we'll break this down into what I teach on about leadership. And so many people wrongly, in my opinion, assume that leadership is all about leading other people. But the reality is leadership starts with yourself. And I have 3 rules of leadership that I try and teach to people. And the very first one is you have to lead yourself. And this is the foundational level. As a matter of fact, I get really deep into this. This is my primary focus on what I'm teaching people. And I'm going to come full circle back to that, to what we talked about. But The second level, your ability to lead yourself really sets the tone for everything. And if you're effectively leading yourself, if you're effectively building discipline and structure within your life and you're setting the example, it makes it really easy to lead others, which is rule number 2. Our ability to motivate, influence, and inspire other people. Now you're able to scale the things that you're doing because you're leading others to get things done. And then rule number 3, you have to lead always. You can't pick and choose when you're going to lead, because the problem is if you do that, it now damages your credibility. And if you're picking and choosing, then obviously you're not leading yourself, which is impacting your ability to lead others. So those are the 3 rules I teach. Now getting back to that foundational level of leading yourself, I believe in something called that I'm teaching called the Pentagon of Peak Performance. And it is 5 key areas of your life that you need to find balance and lead yourself in. The foundational level is physical leadership. I know you look at fitness and the body and optimization, and physical leadership, in my opinion, is one of those key areas that so many people neglect as they get older, especially here in America. I mean, we're one of the most obese countries in the world now. Diabetes is rampant, cardiac disease, and depression. All of it comes back to our ability to take care of ourselves physically. Right. So fitness, nutrition, and sleep are all huge components of that. And I tell people, if you want to be a leader, if you want to take care of yourself, leading yourself and take care of yourself is one of the most important things that you can do. You're going to have more energy to be a better leader. You're going to feel better. Everything is built on this. The second level is mental leadership. So this is where we educate ourselves and we gain experiences, and we also push ourselves out of our comfort zone. So these things are what build that mental leadership. It also builds the area that I call the overcome mindset. This is where grit and resiliency are formed. And reading is a huge thing. We should constantly be educating ourselves. We should constantly be seeking new experiences. Obviously, there's only a limited amount of time, so we can't experience everything. So this is where reading, you can learn so much from someone else that's done something before you that you may never have the opportunity to do because you don't have the time, but you can learn from them. Getting a mentor, someone that's done it before you and trying to learn from them as a mentor, all this falls under mental leadership. Number 3 is emotional leadership, how we manage our emotions. And this is a hard thing. I mean, for some people genetically, we run hotter than others. Some people are, introverts. Some people are extroverts. Some people have a hard time communicating with people. All of this is emotional leadership. Like anything else, we have to work at it. I run really hot. I was a knucklehead when I was younger, and I would let my emotions get the best of me. And I'll be the first to admit, none of this is perfection. We're constantly working, and emotional leadership is one of the hardest things I struggle with. So, but I'm constantly aware of it, and I'm constantly watching myself, hey, if if the water is boiling within me, I know that my reaction may be, I want to say something, but I got to take a step back because I know that what I'm going to say may have a negative impact, and it may damage this relationship, or it may damage where, we want things to go. I mean, that's leadership. That's your ability to lead yourself. Oftentimes in a relationship, husband and wife, they start slinging the zingers when the reality is they're not helping the situation at all. And sometimes our ability to bite our tongue, recognizing the longer impact, will make a bigger difference. That's emotional leadership. Number 4, you mentioned, is social leadership. It's how we build the rings of influence in people around us. SEAL training obviously does a really good job of building this amazing group of very type A leaders around you. So in life and with self-leadership, you have to build that circle of people. And it comes down to your close friends. Who can you confide in? Are they bringing you up, or are they pulling you down? It's in who you work with in business. It's your acquaintances. It's who you associate with. It's who you surround yourself with. And if you are leading yourself, you're going to recognize that the people I surround myself with, I want them to bring me up, not to pull me down. And that's a hard thing. You have to you have to make those choices and manage those relationships. So social leadership. And the last one is spiritual leadership. And this is how we get outside of ourselves and recognize that there's a huge world out there, and a lot of people that are struggling in a lot of different areas. And most of us have a natural tendency to kind of just look within our own sphere of influence.
Right.
So spiritual leadership enables perspective. It enables us to get outside of ourselves. It enables us to have gratitude. For some people, it's religion. For me, I'm a religious person, but I recognize not everybody wants to follow that path or believes in that path, and that's fine. I just tell them, find things that you can get outside of yourself. Meditation, breathing exercises, things to center yourself and understand, to have that calm, peace, and perspective to know there's a bigger world. So those are the things I'm teaching, man.
Yeah, and those are all amazing points. I mean, I could probably talk about those 5 for the next hour or so. There's so much in there. I'll just quickly touch on them kind of one by one. You talked about physical leadership, and coming from a nutrition background where I was on the path to become a dentist, and I saw that I had more of a calling in the nutrition area because I felt that my assets, my skill set was more valuable there, and it was a bigger problem that I could hopefully help address through nutrition programs and supplements and all that. And it's quite sad when you look at obesity rates and diabetes rates in North America, and you look at cardiovascular disease being the number 1 or number 2 killer of men in North America, and the fact that it's a completely preventable disease. It really makes you wonder how much of an emphasis are we putting on our physical leadership, and if that's how you're living your life into your 30s and 40s and 50s, well, how can you be a leader to your own family? Whether you're the male head of the family or the female head of the family, you need to lead by example, because how is the next generation going to be able to learn without the physical leadership provided from your parents or whoever, your grandparents, and right? And so
absolutely.
Yeah, and going back to some of the other points, the emotional leadership, like staying calm, and you brought up the perspective of your significant other and yourself say that you're arguing, and I've had this issue with my own significant other, especially early on in a relationship where we're both stubborn, and we can get kind of heated, and it takes a lot of patience and practice and training to learn to calm yourself down in situations where you feel that you have to get angry and say what's on your mind and just get out of your chest and try to prove yourself right. And that for me took a really long time. It's taking years, and it's still a constant practice. There's still times where I catch myself getting a little bit too heated and forgetting well, what's the situation? How can I take myself out of this? How do I calm myself down and then really look at this from an objective perspective so, the best outcome can happen, which is a really difficult thing to do, especially for someone who is ingrained in that mentality over time. The concept of social leadership, and this is more of a question, it's something that I've seen before where, people can be natural born leaders, but they'll go into an environment where they have to learn to let others lead. So I think the self-awareness to know where your skill set is limited, and maybe someone else needs to take that charge, and really maybe it's sometimes an ego thing, putting your ego down and understanding when something is best for the group. I don't know if you would agree with that, or when there's the time to let others take charge.
No, I agree with it 100%. I mean, I think that the higher levels of leadership, when you're effectively leading yourself, one of the best leaders I ever worked with said to me that people will follow you if you give them a reason to. Mm-hmm. So when you start to realize that people are following you because you've given them a reason to, at this point, you can put your ego away. And now you start to look at, well, how do I groom and grow these people? Another great leader I worked for, he was amazing at this, because I had made some mistakes at one point in my career. I talk about this in the Jocko podcast,
Hmm.
and it's really the foundation of what my book, The Trident, is about. It's
Hmm.
that journey of leadership from the fall and the mistakes I made to the redemption and coming back to truly understand what it was to be a leader.
Hmm.
But during that time, I had failed, and I came back to my next SEAL team. My leader, my boss, sat me down and just said, "Hey, I don't care what happened to you. I just want I want to focus on the future, and I want you to show me you can lead in the future. What happened in the past, I don't care about. We're now focused on the future." And what he did is he gave me opportunities that really were his opportunities to lead. Like he was a number one guy and I was a number two. So there were plenty of opportunities where we would be doing a complex training evolution, and it was his job to execute this, to lead it. But he would step back and say, "You know what? I'm going to sit this one out. Jay, you're in charge, man." And that's a testament to his leadership, that his ego wasn't so wrapped up that he was like, "I'm the leader, I have to lead everything."
Hmm.
Instead, he did some amazing things when he did this. One, it built my confidence. And it made me understand, hey, I have the ability to do this also.
Hmm.
Two, he was building our team even stronger because, one, he recognized that in the career we had, if something happened to him, we all had to step up and lead. And in this case, it might have been me or it could have been somebody else.
Right.
And then three, he built credibility with me, with the guys I was leading. So that's really where you're exactly right. A really good leader will recognize when he can step back and allow the other people he leads to grow by pushing them to lead.
Right, and I see this with companies as well, especially big corporations. When people get into a CEO role, they assume that they are supposed to know everything and that they always have to be in a leadership position. And that part of that is true. I mean, because you're the CEO, you're in charge of running the organization. But sometimes it's better to listen to other people within the organization that may have a better opinion than you and may have an opinion that is better for the overall progress or direction of the company as a whole. And so there are lots of case studies about companies that have burned to the ground because of egocentric CEOs that were not able to put their their own ego aside and think about the company as a whole. And I think that happens in all industries, right? Whether you're talking about the army or business, and you're big on that. It's not just your experiences and lessons go far beyond serving in the military. They go and they dive into organizations, systems, and these are systematic principles that you can apply to everything essentially.
Absolutely. That's the thing I speak a lot on, that even though I learned so many lessons from the SEAL teams, leadership is leadership, teamwork is teamwork, and resiliency, change, processes. It doesn't matter what field you work in. Those things are the same. Our ability to lead and influence people, our little ability to bring teams of people together working towards a common goal, it's the same regardless of what you're doing. Human beings are the same. You go anywhere around the world, maybe we do a few things differently, maybe we see the world a little differently, but the basic mechanics of how we do things are the same. So that's why it doesn't really matter what career field you work in. If you're a leader and if you're trying to organize teams and accomplish things, the mechanics are the same.
Yep, 100%. Right now I the type of exercise I do is generally like a CrossFit style training. I work out at a CrossFit gym, and luckily our office is also located here. We have an office space inside the gym, and so I'm fortunate enough to be in an environment where there's constant, camaraderie, competition, failure, but progress. And it's a pretty great environment to be, because on a micro level, you're always being challenged to, struggles and overcoming them, learning from others. And it's really great because it applies, to every aspect of my life, essentially. There's another concept that you talked about, and I think it's really interesting, but it's the struggles of leadership between friends, and allowing new leaders to come into an existing circle, or if you're that leader that's going into an existing circle, and how you can kind of mesh in with the existing system, which I'm sure is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're new, and I want to go back just to make sure I understood. It sounded like you were talking about a little bit about peer leadership, that we're all kind of on the same level, and then one person gets bumped up and suddenly finds himself in a leadership position. And
Hmm.
that's probably one of the hardest things in leadership that I've found and that I've seen, because, you were all kind of on this even playing field, and then suddenly, and this happens in organizations all across the country, someone gets promoted
Yeah.
and now they're leading the people that they were with. And in my opinion, this comes back to rule number one: your ability to lead yourself. If you are effectively leading yourself all along the way, and now you continue to do so, discipline, structure, you're providing the guidance to others to lead them, but you're I don't want to say beyond reproach, but in some ways you've laid this rock solid foundation.
Hmm.
So even if your peers, maybe they don't agree with the decision making on why, because this is sometimes where friction occurs.
Hmm.
They look and say, well, why did he get promoted and I didn't, or why did
Yeah.
she get promoted and I didn't?
Right.
If you continue to focus on leading yourself, and then moving us towards the goals of whatever the organization is focused on, whatever that effort is, then you will continue to win them over. Because now, it's one thing if you're a bad leader and this has happened, and now you're really not leading yourself. You're that individual that for whatever reason is making mistakes or is not doing the things that you need to do.
Hmm.
That makes it a lot harder. If you're coming in from outside of an organization into an organization, that's actually a little bit easier. Well, I'd say it's even a lot easier.
Hmm.
And the great thing about that is you carry nothing with you. There's no baggage with you, unless maybe you've made mistakes and there's a reputation that's preceding you. But if not, you're coming in to fill a position. So the great thing is you are now able to shape your future from day one.
Hmm.
If you maybe struggled with, let's say, hypothetically, emotional leadership in the past, well, nobody knows that within this organization. You are a new individual. So you should be laser focused on whatever your areas of weakness are, strengthening them, and leading yourself, leading others, and leading always. And you can, man, sky's the limit, because you're able to create everything you need from that moment forward.
Right, and that's really good advice. Yeah, there's another concept, and hopefully we can get into more detail with this one. It's about focusing on yourself versus focusing on the mission. And I know this is one of the most important concepts that you talk about as well. And so, how do people shut down their ego, and how can you relate your own personal experiences to learning to focus on the mission versus learning to focus on yourself?
Yeah, it's this seems like a really simple concept when you lay it out, but
Yeah.
it's as I get older, I look at it more, and it's definitely much more layered, because the reality is, I mean, there I don't I don't want to say there isn't anybody, but there's definitely, it's a very tiny percentage of people who truly are so selfless that they would never think about the impact on themselves in any way. I mean, we're just human. Obviously, even if we're saving the world, we recognize, there is an impact, a positive impact for us for saving the world, if that makes sense.
Right.
So where that starts to tilt is when we start to place our desire to be recognized for saving the world above actually saving the world. That's kind of a grandiose idea here, but and that's where, oftentimes leaders start to lose their way, is when their own personal gain is more important than the gain of the team, the organization, and the people they lead. And this is really where things get upside down. If because that type of person will potentially take shortcuts or even damage the organization because they're more focused on their own gain than the organization's gain. And I made those mistakes when I was a young leader. At one point, I was more focused on looking like I was this great leader,
Right.
than focusing on, hey, guess what? You'll be a great leader by executing the things that need to be done for the mission and for the men. And understanding that there's no shortcut. There's no quick answer to suddenly launch yourself into this amazing leadership position. I mean, sometimes things can happen that will occur, but you should never be out seeking it. What you should be focused on is, okay, what is the mission or the focus of our team or organization, and how do I play into that? And how do I bring my team together so we accomplish that? And then, we just peel it back, okay, if we need to get to, point Z, and right now we're at A, how do we lay out that, methodical step-by-step process to get to Z? And that's really how it happens, and not looking for those shortcuts, and not looking for, hey man, I can really launch myself, to stratospheric heights by stepping on other people, or by, going around this corner or cutting this.
Right. And I have here, actually, it's the note that you put on your door. And I know that this was something that went, viral, and for good reason. And I, when I read it, it was unbelievable. And before I read the note, would you be able to describe, even just briefly, the incident, what went through your head during that ambush, the rehab process, the ups and downs, and how, you really coped through that time by just being so mentally resilient?
Yeah. What went through my head? A bullet. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, no.
No, no, the firefight was pretty fierce. But we had been in a bunch of firefights at this point, so it wasn't something new for us, although it definitely not one like this. I mean, we were really pinned down. It was a bad situation. Obviously I was shot up. I had other teammates that were shot up, and we were in a position where we really didn't have any place to go. We had one point of cover, meaning something that can stop bullets, and it was like a large John Deere type tractor tire that we were behind. Well, my guys were behind. I was actually still pinned down out front and wasn't able to get up. So the thoughts going through my head were, they ranged from how we were, they probably started with how we were fighting. I was still in mission work mode. How do we call in a fire mission? Where are our guys? Is there any way we could flank the enemy? But then quickly recognizing that I was bleeding out and I was going to die. Yeah. And that thought process started to sink in. And when I came to the realization of that, then I started thinking more of my family and, not being able to see them again. So that was a lot of the thought process that occurred. Thankfully, I survived and got on the medevac helicopter, and they got me to Baghdad, where they saved my life. And that started a whole new journey. I mean, it's interesting. I don't think any of us in life, even in the military, you think about, hey, I could be killed. And obviously we have to do a lot to prepare for that. Yeah. A lot of paperwork, we have insurance, we have all these things. I mean, even my wife, and, I prepared her, hey, if I don't come home, I actually had letters written to my wife and each one of my kids if I didn't come home. So I was ready for that, but nobody in life goes through, well, what happens if I'm severely injured? So it definitely is kind of a shock to the system to wake up, at this high point of your career and suddenly be in a hospital bed where doctors are talking about amputating your arm and, the level of damage to your face and your trach, and you can't speak, and you're eating out of a stomach tube. That was hard mentally to really wrap my head around. So it was at that point in the hospital. I had been. They had flown me from Baghdad to Balad, and then from Balad to Germany, and Germany to Bethesda, Maryland, where the National Medical Center is for our military wounded warriors. So I was there for probably, 4 or 5 days, kind of struggling with everything that happened with me. And I had some people that came into the room, and they were just expressing a lot of pity over what had happened. And they made some comments about kind of assumptions that I would never be able to go out and be a productive member of society because of both the mental and physical wounds that I had sustained. And when they left, that really made me angry. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me.
Right.
And my wife came back in the room. She had left for a brief period, and I motioned to her, hey, give me my notepad, because I couldn't talk because I was trached and wired shut. And I wrote out this sign, and it just said, attention to all who enter here. If you're coming into this room with sadness or sorrow, don't bother. The wounds that I received, I got in a job that I love, doing it for people that I love, defending the freedom of a country I deeply love. I will make a full recovery. What is full? That is the absolute utmost physically. I have the ability to recover, and then I will push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense rapid regrowth. If you're not prepared for that, go elsewhere. And we signed it, the management, because I don't know, it made sense. And I told her, hey, put it on the door. Don't, nobody's allowed in my room from this point forward until they read this. And when I talk about the sign, everybody makes a really big deal about the sign, but I talk about the sign as really rule number 3 in the lead always idea. You know, bad things are going to happen to people. We're going to have these incidents that occur in our lives. I call them life ambushes. So I survived a real enemy ambush. My next book that's coming out, Overcome, is built around this principle that in life we are going to sustain ambushes. Now, they may be a micro ambush, which is more of a little mental ambush. We all have these mental ambushes, you know, those moments where you know, something inside you tells you can't do this, or, you know, who are you to try? Right. Hell, I had a micro ambush just the other day, you know, as I'm trying to grow my business and do my things. Minor ambushes are things that disrupt your schedule, maybe temporarily for a day or a week, but they're really not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. If we were to fast forward a year, you wouldn't even remember it happened. Right. And then major life ambushes are those things that will forever leave mental, emotional, or physical scars on you. Regardless of what you have, micro, minor, or a major ambush, you have a choice. Yeah. You have a choice how you want to act. And despite how hard it is, you can choose. And going back to that sign on the door, I chose to be positive. I chose to lift other people up. I chose not to be a victim. I chose that I was going to drive forward no matter what happened, and try and, you know, take others with me along with me driving forward. And that really made an impact. You never know the impact you're going to have with this lead always mentality. But that sign has gone on to impact people all across the country. I've had people write me on a regular basis and just say, hey, your sign, I'm suffering from cancer, and I put your sign on my door. Or, hey, I was in a bad accident and I found your sign and I just want to say thank you. Wounded warriors still write me and talk about the sign which hangs in the wounded ward at Bethesda or Walter Reed. I mean, it impacted Michelle Obama enough. She wrote about it not once, but twice in her book. She writes about it in the book, and she writes about it in the epilogue. Wow. So you never know the impact of being positive in those hard moments. But that's leadership. It's leadership to choose that positivity and say, okay, I know everybody else would say lay down and just wither and die on the spot, but I'm not going to. I'm going to, and this is my new idea, and you know, we have a slogan in the military called "Get off the X," and the X being that point of attack, or, you know, in the case of life ambushes, it's the incident point. And in order to survive, you have to get off the X, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally. You got to get off the X. And the faster you get off the X, the quicker you will start to advance and make progress. And then the longer you sit on the X, it's like quicksand. The more it will pull you down.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. That note is incredibly powerful. And obviously, you know, you just did that with the intention of letting people know what your expectations were and what choice you were making, and look at how big of a global impact it's made. And I'm sure it's affected, you know, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people all around the world. just because you made that choice, and now it gave other people the ability to make choices for themselves as well. And you're right, you always have a choice. And one last small thing to ask about that, through that rehabilitation process, what role did gratitude play in the recovery of it and your ability to just keep fighting every single day? The gratitude of having, say, your family and friends around, and really changing your perspective to see the positive things in that scenario, which I'm sure might have been hard to do at the time.
No, I mean, it played a huge role. Gratitude and perspective, and social leadership, who I had surrounded myself with. So I'm really fortunate at that point in my life. I talk about the fact that, I talk about back to that Pentagon and peak performance. One of the great things about that is, look at that Pentagon and the legs of it kind of like the legs of a table. So if you're only strong in two areas, a two-legged table can't stand. Mm-hmm. So you have to at least be strong in three areas to have a little bit of balance. But a three-legged table is easy to knock over. Yeah. Four legs, it starts to get much more secure. Man, try and flip over a five-legged, really heavy table. Man, it takes a lot of effort because it's really grounded. Yeah. So when I was wounded, I was strong and balanced in all five areas of that Pentagon. And I truly attribute that to why I launched from that failure, or if not that failure, but from that crisis point in my life. So, and when it happened, it enabled me to really have good perspective. I kind of look back and I said, man, I've been through worse things. I mean, that failure as a leader was probably the hardest journey I've ever been through. And I'd had some other incidents and injuries. I mean, so I just said, well, you know what? I've been through worse. I'm gonna get through this. Perspective enabled me to look at other wounded warriors who were around me, and I was like, you know what? They're gonna put me back together, man. And they were able to save my arm, so I didn't lose my arm. Mm-hmm. My mental faculties were still good. And there's a lot of guys and gals out there who are missing limbs and who have major traumatic brain injuries or have been burned. So I just said, I'm going to be thankful for what I have. And, maybe I won't be the same, but I'll figure out what the new 100% is going to be.
Right.
So perspective, gratitude. I mean, all the people who helped me. I mean, I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for the doctors and nurses and medical staff and my family, who played such a major role in helping to drive me forward. It's still a choice. They cannot pull you up if you're not willing to climb up.
Right.
And this is one of the hardest things to watch when people are stuck on the X, and no matter what amount of pulling you do, if someone wants to just embrace that victim mentality, and so people sometimes get comfortable on it and they don't want to leave, and you'll try and pull them off and they'll crawl back to it.
Right.
So,
yeah, and what you just mentioned about the Pentagon and the legs of a table and the stability of it, it's always been interesting to me because one of the first things my father taught me early on, and we have a big family and we're very close as siblings. He taught me the concept of a fist, and he basically demonstrated that if you try to put a finger through a wall, you're probably going to break it. You try to put two fingers through a wall, you're probably going to break them both. But when all five fingers work together and you make a fist, you can punch through anything. And so when things work in a cohesive unit, and you have that support and it comes together, I really think that you can be an unstoppable force, and that applies to family and friends, and it goes back to the social leadership. Who is in your circle of friends and who are you surrounding yourself with, and what are their intentions. So I think it's really, really important, and obviously it played a key role in your not just your rehab, but your ability to stay positive, and really just battle every single day. So just a few more things. Now I know you have a lot going on. You're a motivational speaker. You have a book. You have a new book coming out. You have your own business. So you have a lot going on, and right now, what are you doing to give back based on your experiences? Is it the books, the motivational speaks? I know you have you're part of a nonprofit organization as well called Wounded Wear. Can you also go a little bit more into detail with that? Because I think that is also really interesting.
Yeah, and we've actually we phased down our nonprofit at the end of last year. So right now it's kind of at a pause.
Yeah.
Well, one side is totally phased down. We will probably bring Wounded Wear back as a foundation later this year or very early in 2020. One of the things I'm, and I encourage a lot of people to take a look at their own lives with this, but I realized I was starting to spread myself too thin.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't, I didn't have good balance.
Yeah.
And I was getting to the point where, something was going to give if I didn't take a step back and reorganize. So I really looked at where I could make the biggest impact. And right now, I think the demand on the content that I'm putting out on leadership and on helping people to lead themselves, especially teaching people how to lead themselves through failure, crisis, adversity, how to implement long-term change. These are things people are hungry for. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I could impact people at a higher level. So phase down the nonprofit, and totally now focused on the leadership company and growing this, my jasonredman.com company, and putting that into the book. I give back I do a lot of pro bono events. I do a lot of reduced price events. I speak for law enforcement for almost a quarter of what I normally speak for corporate type events. When I was running my nonprofit, we had a program called the Overcome Academy, where it was a leadership program for wounded warriors. Well, I've now launched the Overcome Army. It is a group coaching program that people can sign up, and they pay $99 a month, and I run one class every single week. They're part of a private Facebook group. And we interact on their leadership problems, on structure, discipline. Last week's class was all about building structure into your life. We were talking about time blocking during the week. But for that program, like I said, it's $99, but if you're law enforcement, military, or first responder, it's half that. It's 50% off. And a lot of the wounded warriors that I worked with, I invited them into the program for free, so that they could continue to keep up what we had accomplished before. So I'm really passionate about our veterans. I'm passionate about brain health. With our veterans, we are seeing a lot of veterans. The suicide epidemic is huge. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing stuff with the Concussion Legacy Foundation. The same group that is focused on concussions with NFL is now trying to assist, is doing research on the military. Mm-hmm. And part of it is research. We don't fully understand the impact on the brain from blast injuries. Right. So that side, and then another group, Project Headstrong, who is providing psychological support to veterans, trying to get them, if they need help, trying to have them seen within 48 to 72 hours. So both are really good groups.
Well, that's unbelievable. I mean, just the amount of work that you're not only doing in terms of the leadership sphere, but giving back to your community as well. I applaud you for all of that. It's amazing work, and it provides a tremendous amount of value to people who need it. And I guess just to wrap this up, before I ask where to find you for people that are listening, to me, one of the biggest misconceptions is the concept of failure, and that it's a bad thing. We look at failure as this horrible thing that people should be ashamed of. When you fail a class in school, it ruins your chances of becoming a lawyer or a doctor. If you fail at the gym, people laugh at you, or whatever it might be. But I've always been a big fan of failure, because the only times in my life where I've ever really grown as a person, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, has been through my failures. And so years ago, I started putting myself into situations where I knew I would fail, because I knew that I would learn from it. So I started to learn a whole bunch of new sports, just doing things that I knew were going to make me uncomfortable, and that I could really grow and benefit from. And I feel that it's made a really positive impact in my life, because my confidence is a lot higher now. And so I really think that failure is this unbelievable opportunity to get better as a person. But what is, maybe one principle or one or two principles that you think people can apply to change their perspective on failure and learn from failure, rather than running from it or hiding from it or being ashamed of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what it is, the stigma about failure, and nobody likes to fail. I mean, I don't
Mm-hmm.
like to fail either. I can't stand it. But I agree with you. You need to embrace failure because this is where we are going to grow the most. I mean, the overcome mindset is built in failure.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about it. SEAL training forces you to fail all the time. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
is probably the foundational thing. They will tell you exactly how you need to do something, and you will execute it perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll fail you for it. They'll make something. If they can't figure out a way to fail you, they'll make something up to fail you. It is designed to be as unfair as possible
Mm-hmm.
because they want to build this mindset of, guess what? It is going to go wrong. No plan is going to go according to plan, and it's going to go train wreck horrifically wrong. And we're not looking for people who are going to lay down and cry because everything went wrong. We're looking for
Right.
people that are going to step up and just drive forward. And really, if you can build that mindset in yourself, that when you fail or when you struggle, that you're going to get up and launch from it. And you're just going to get up and you're going to say, okay, that didn't work. What's the next path? Where do I go from here? You know, I'm living proof of it. I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
failed. I've had some pretty colossal failures in my life, but they have helped make me into who I am. They've created this incredibly tenacious, resilient, overcome mindset.
Yeah.
So I just tell people, like you said, don't be afraid to try. Get out there.
Yeah.
So many people let fear drive their decision making,
Mm-hmm.
and I tell people you got to live greatly. You only get one life, and you're going to get to the end of your life. Take it from a guy who thought I was checking out. You're going to be at the end of your life someday, and you're going to look back and you're going to say, man, I wish I had done this or I wish I had done that, because you never went after it. You never tried. And at least try. Even if you fail, at least you can look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, man, I went after it. I tried. Much better than 90% of the people out there who will heckle you or jeer when they've never even tried themselves, and they don't even have the balls to try. So go after it, man. That's what makes the difference, and that's what will build an overcome mindset. You want a gritty, tenacious overcome mindset? Just go out there and try things and fail and pick yourself back up and go.
I love it. I couldn't agree more with that, and I couldn't be happier to end off this amazing podcast with that piece of advice. Yeah, last but not least, you do have a new book coming out. So, where can people find that? Do you have a tentative release date? And where can people find you in terms of your motivational speaking, your website, and your Instagram? How can they just connect with you in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to shout that out. So you can find me at jasonredman.com. Real easy. You can find my books, my online store. I have Overcome merchandise and Get Off the X merchandise. My first book, The Trident, New York Times bestseller. You can get signed copy through my website. My coaching is under consulting, so I do both group coaching through the Overcome Army. I do individual hourly coaching if people are looking for that with business, leadership, structure, and then I have a very high-level executive coaching program. It's an annual program for people. And then my new book, Overcome, will come out on December 10th. So probably midsummer, we will start pre-sales on that book and start pushing the word on that. Very active on social media, probably the most active on Instagram, but I'm on Twitter under Jason Redman WW. I'm on Facebook under Jason Redman, Instagram Jason Redman WW, and then LinkedIn under Jason Redman.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I think that this podcast is going to blow people away. I really enjoyed it. I think our listeners are going to find a ton of value out of it as well. And I'm excited to read your new book. I can't wait for that to come out, and hopefully I can get my hands on it closer to December. But yeah, thanks for chatting with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we can chat again down the road.
Aryan, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure, okay? Take care, Jason.
All right, man. Yeah,
All right.
you guys have a great
Bye-bye.
one. All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.